Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, we have 2 Maple level sponsors this year, and as part of that sponsorship, we are offering them a few minutes to share more about themselves. And so I would like to have everyone cut the conversation because I would like to introduce our second Maple sponsor, which is Vermont Economic Development Authority. And so Sarah Isham and Sam Buckley are going to share a little bit more about what they do to support our forest economy. So Sarah and Sam, here you go.
Thank you, Christy. Can everyone hear me all right here? All right. Well, I am Sarah Isham, and I've been at VITA for a long time, involved with agricultural and forestry lending. And I will say that we do include forestry under sort of our general agricultural term that we use for our loans. And VITA was created back in 1974, and originally to do industrial loans. And through the years, it's expanded to have a wide array of loan products, both for commercial, typical commercial loans, for agricultural businesses, and for forestry-based businesses. And I am joined here today by Sam Buckley, and he's the Director of Energy and Broadband Lending, and Pete Sampson is our Chief Lending Officer. And over at our booth in the corner, because we do have a table, is Denise Rousseau, who is a loan officer. And as I said, the forestry projects have been eligible for a number of years, but we've really started to, that program's really gotten more traction in the last few years as the industry has faced some real challenges that are based on weather and other economic considerations. And so I kind of think that, I feel like we, like personally and at VITA, we've really learned to love the forest and to really embrace sort of the general working lands-based businesses as a very important part of what we do. So in the agriculture and forestry sector, we can do a variety of loans. They include the farm ownership loans, which are for real estate purchases and real estate improvements. The operating loans are the ones we often typically use for our forestry businesses. They include the purchase of things like machinery and equipment, but we also can do revolving lines of credit and some loans that are for working capital. Their energy loans are available, and Sam will talk about those in a little bit. So in 2024, we targeted $3 million for what we call our forestry loan program, with whereby we could make loans for up to $500,000 with 2% reduction to our regular interest rate for the first 5 years of the loan. So these were targeted for that size loan amount and less, because we can make loans for up to $5 million actually in the agriculture and forest sectors. And we've closed 11 loans in that program, totaling almost $2.2 million, and they've been for a whole variety of purposes. The Vermont Department of Forest, Parks, and Recreation has been speaking with us about the possibility of using $500,000 of fiscal year 2026 clean water funds that were appropriated by the legislature to incent the purchase of low-impact logging machinery and equipment. These are to support the implementation of AMPs, accepted management practices for maintaining water quality on logging jobs. And so we've been talking with Annie Fitzko and with Oliver Pearson about how these funds might be best used to support our loan program for pretty specific purchases, which would be, for low impact practices, the purchase of new and used equipment, such as cut-to-length harvesters, tract feller bunchers, for the retrofit of existing equipment to make it low impact, and for miscellaneous purchases like sediment and erosion control products and temporary bridges or mats. And we're going to consult with FPR as we kind of roll this out if it works. We're hoping to more deeply subsidize the loans that are for these specific purposes. And we're soliciting feedback both to us at VITA and also to FPR about what folks in the industry think would be most beneficial, whether it would be to have more deeply subsidized rates, or whether there's some other, there may be some other idea that someone has. So I do look forward to getting some feedback and sharing more about this opportunity. With that, I'll turn it over to Sam.
I think Sarah used all my time, but it's okay. I'm just going to do a quick plug for our energy and commercial loans that are forestry adjacent. On the energy side, we've made loans to biomass energy producers like wood pellet mills, as well as wood chip producers. And on the energy consumption side, we've made financing for hotels and cities with using biomass energy generation plants. And then on the commercial side, it's been a wide range of forestry adjacent businesses, everything from sawmills to furniture makers. I think I saw Charlie Shackleton on a poster when I walked in. Charlie's a longtime VITA borrower. As well as on the recreation side, we've financed many of the independently owned ski areas in the state, including the one that we're at right now. And actually, most recently, the expansion to the Timberline Lodge, which we'll be meeting in this afternoon, was a proudly financed VITA project. So thank you and enjoy the session.
Thank you very much to VITA. And again, thank you to all of our sponsors for helping support today's event. Thanks, Ellen. So I'm going to turn things over to my colleague and really my boss, Ellen Kaler, who's the Executive Director of the Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund. And she's going to facilitate a really interesting discussion, and she's going to explain how that works. So with that, I'm going to hand things over to Ellen.
Thank you so much. So excited for this fishbowl that we're going to have. I'm going to explain a little bit about it. But I wanted to give you a sense of where we're going, because between now and lunch, the conversation we want to have is twofold. One is with all of our amazing panelists, and you can read their bios in your packet. We're not going to do massive introductions here. We're gonna try to sort of back up from Alan's amazing, inspiring talk and level set on where are we today with things like all of the uncertainties that we all have been experiencing with the new administration around the tariffs. So they're on again and off again, and different rates, changes sometimes daily, every other day. There's executive orders that have been happening. There has been challenges with our neighbors to the north in Canada should they become the 51st state? And all of the responses that has elicited, that has created tension in the region that we're working really hard to overcome. So what we want to do with the fishbowl panel is to use it as a bridge between what Alan laid out as what's possible in the future in many ways, and the things that are actually happening on the ground in his world today with all of the demonstrations and the examples that he gave, and use this time with our participants to level set a little bit in the room around, all right, where are we at today with the current economic situation? And then that's a bridge into table conversations that we want to have with you for the final half hour of our time before lunch. And we're going to be asking you to talk about, pick up the thread of what Alan has already been talking about. What could be done here in Vermont, in our region, to spur more regional wood, more Vermont wood getting into our housing projects? So as you're listening to this conversation, be thinking about what are some actionable ideas that are bubbling up for you, because we want to capture those at our tables in that final half an hour. We'll hear a few ideas at the very end before we break for lunch. So that's where we're headed. So you can read in the bios, as I mentioned, our amazing cast of characters up here in our fishbowl. And how does a fishbowl work? Well, We're going to be setting the stage. First, we're going to let Oliver Pearson from the Department of Forest, Parks, and Rec, he's going to have about 5 minutes really dialed in on just level setting. What is the state of tariffs as of today, 6/19/25? And then we're going to hear briefly, again, very briefly, from Ryan McLaren from Senator Welch's office on setting the stage for how are things going with trade and our partners, the emergency, or the executive orders and everything that's been coming down, and some of the conversations that Senator Welch has been leading across the region with our counterparts up in Canada. And then we're going to open it up for, we have a series of questions that I'm going to be asking of each of our panelists. And we're going to be rotating it around. We're going to keep it crisp. We're going to keep it moving. And then you might notice that at the end there, next to Jacob, there's an empty chair. And that's by design. And so we're going to be really encouraging the panelists to be asking each other follow-up questions so that's more of a dynamic conversation. But then I'm going to invite at some point in the conversation, if anybody has a burning question for the group, we're going to ask you to come up and sit in that chair. I'll acknowledge you, and you can ask your question. We're not looking for you to go on about your own thoughts on this. We're going to have plenty of time for that at our table conversations. This is any clarifying questions or a key data point that you think is important to interject into this conversation as a service to all of us then being able to have rich table conversations. Okay? So that's where we're headed. And I'm going to leave it there. And Jacob's the nicest, which is why. So we're going to start off with Oliver. And Oliver, could you just share a little bit about where are we at with the actual percentage tariffs right now? And what have been some of those impacts so far that we've seen in the industry, both good and bad? And are there situations in which these tariffs might in fact be helpful, or is it really just only unhelpful? So give us a sense of that.
Yep. Thank you. Good morning. I'll try to do what Alan asked. This is very much a moving target. So if I get some things wrong, feel free to correct me. When I think about the status of tariffs, I divide it into 3 categories: China, Canada, and the rest of the world. So vis-a-vis China, folks may have remember that a few months back, China banned the import of U.S. logs as a result of quarantine issues. So I don't think we're sending any round logs into China at this point of time. There's also this 90-day pause on sort of the larger tariffs between U.S. and China that was put in place in May that essentially has a 10% temporary tariff in place on all Chinese goods. Just on June 17th, which I think was pretty recently, it was announced that there's a new framework agreement between U.S. and China in place, 55% import tariff on things coming in from China, and China will put a 10% import tariff on goods from the U.S. So that's the sort of latest situation with China. Canada was absent from the Liberation Day announcements, both Canada and Mexico, and goods from Canada remain at the same status that they were prior to the Trump administration, for the most part, under the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement. So what that means is that for Canadian softwood lumber coming into the U.S., there's today a 14.5% tariff rate, which is sort of comprised of anti-dumping and countervailing duties. That rate is projected to go up possibly as high as 34% later this year. And there's also some investigations going on around the potential for wood to be seen as a national security issue, which could place additional tariffs on wood entering from Canada. The broader picture of the U.S.-Canada relationships has led to Canada putting some new duties on U.S. exports into Canada. So there's a bit of new challenges for trying to send stuff into Canada. Rest of world, 10% tariff was announced in April as that 90-day pause on reciprocal global tariffs. And we might see the administration begin to announce country-by-country deals, such as what was recently announced with England. So the second part, the impacts. Well, I think the biggest impact is disruption and instability. And who's in the business sector that doesn't love that, right? But I think what we're seeing is uncertainty and fluctuations in price and demand. Businesses are trying to figure out what's going on, taking a wait-and-see approach. Everything's running at 40 hours a week or less, no double time, no overtime at mills. And the market is being very cautious and careful with this uncertainty. There's this great sort of multi-layered challenge facing the wood industry is permanent capacity closures, uncertainty around tariffs, and other stock market fluctuations and interest rate challenges, particularly that affect the housing industry, are creating a very huge challenge for the industry. It reminds me of that Calvin and Hobbes cartoon where there's a toxic waste truck, a school bus, and a cement mixer converging at a railroad crossing all at the same time, and Calvin looks up and says, this is going to be interesting when these three vehicles collide. So sort of feels we're in that kind of challenging situation with difficulties coming from all sides. What else is happening? Home builders are facing challenges as lumber prices remain volatile. Some of the species in demand right now, there's been real changes there, but hard maple, red and white oaks, and ash, to some extent there's a limited supply, seem to be species in demand. Construction market overview, housing starts are unchanged from last year. There's growth in multifamily units, but those use less sort of durable wood products than single family units. High-end housing market is still moving, but that's not where the volume is. I'll just make a couple more points, Ellen, and then wrap up. Lumber prices, they were up early in the days of the Trump administration. They've come back down a bit, but they're still 30% higher or so compared to last year. So we're seeing overall pretty large increases in the lumber market. Mill production has declined nationally, making it harder to get some special lengths and widths. Payments, businesses that have to actually deal with paying tariffs. If you're importing wood from Brazil, you have to pay that 10% tariff. There's still a lot of confusion around how to do that. And the shipping sector is a mess if you're trying to export containers out of the United States due to uncertainty around tariffs, costs, and also to some extent a shortage of containers. So I think the impact, has any of this been helpful? One way to think about this is the U.S. does not currently produce enough lumber to meet domestic demands. So we import about 15 billion board feet annually. So tariffs and efforts to increase domestic wood availability, which I think we'll talk about, some of these executive orders, have the potential down the road possibly to help the nation move in the direction of self-sufficiency. But it's going to take months, if not years, to ramp up sawmill production, and the market won't feel any impact of some of the tariffs, any positive impact of tariffs and nascent and future efforts to increase production for quite some time. So I would have to answer your last question, Ellen, by saying tariffs have not yet been helpful, and recent developments on the lumber front indicate that it's going to be quite some time before increased logging from federal lands and higher tariffs have any positive impacts, and the industry is more feeling the negative impacts of the uncertainty that these sort of disruptions around tariffs and pricing have caused. So I think I'd sum it up with that final point.
Thank you so much, Oliver. I think that was really, really helpful. A lot of data points. We'll be making remarks, and all of this is being taped, so if you missed anything, you can talk to Oliver, and also we'll have it recorded. So, and as Oliver said, it's always changing. So what we just talked about may be different in another couple of weeks. So we'll have to keep an eye on it for sure. But thank you. And so I want to jump over to Ryan McLaren, who works for Senator Welch. And so what, if any, impacts have you been seeing so far, or hearing about from talking to industry members about the president's executive orders and the memo to the U.S. Forest Service around increasing timber production on federal land, and how that might impact Vermont and our surrounding states? And what overall has been the senator and his approach to trying to connect with our counterparts in Canada around some of these impacts that we're starting to see in terms of relationships and connection points, and even just physical transport of product across the border?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Ryan McLaren. I'm a senior advisor for Senator Welch. And on your first question on the executive orders, there's two executive orders. Oliver mentioned one around an investigation into our lumber industry as it relates to national security. There's a second one meant to increase timber harvest on national forests by by 25%. In both cases, those initially feel a lot like sort of messaging opportunities. The first one, but they create a bunch of uncertainty as they roll out on the ground. The first one on the national security front is sort of to pocket the ability to increase tariffs on a whim, and in response to whatever sort of tit for tat, back and forth global conversation is happening. And so, like, nothing's happening there except it's just like a ticking time bomb potentially for the industry. And then on the National Forest front, I don't know if anyone is here from the Forest Service or not, but our communication with Forest Service around the Green Mountain National Forest has been pretty, the response we've gotten has been pretty sort of muted in that they think they could achieve those targets with projects that are already in process. So like not much would dramatically change if the work that they're doing now carries on at the pace that they expect it to happen. And so in some ways that's positive, but there is still a bunch of uncertainty both within the Forest Service and in DC about exactly how the Trump administration intends to measure that target. And so, it could change overnight, and we've seen a lot of things happen very quickly where they've decided this is the thing they have to do now, and they are sort of directing the Forest Service to do that at all costs and as fast as humanly possible. And we've seen that sort of effort in immigration in some ways. So right now it's felt pretty positive, both from the Forest Service side and from constituents and people in the industry we've heard from. But everything has the caveat that if it catches the eye of the president, that could change quite quickly and has the potential to be relatively negative. That's the executive orders. On the Canada front, Peter's been to Canada twice in the last year. He was just there a month ago talking to the new prime minister, the foreign minister, and members from the Canadian Business Council, and which obviously will represent a huge portion of the forestry industry up there. And our message is Canada's our best ally, Canada's our most important trading partner, Vermont's here for Canada, and this is crazy. So that's the message we're trying to send to Canadians, and Tim's been a partner in that endeavor. But there's no doubt that the Canadians mean business. Like they are not taking the sort of frontal assault on this bilateral relationship lightly at all, and they're not going to take it from us. And so they have. I have Peter's impression from the Prime Minister was he's a very serious person. He is a very smart person, and he is well equipped to respond to whatever's happening, whatever the United States is throwing at them. And so our message is none of that's good for Vermont, none of that's good for Vermonters, and we're trying to avoid it at all costs. But his impression in all of those interactions was, that's nice. They appreciate it. They very much appreciate any endeavor to sort of express the appreciation of the United States and Vermont for our Canadian partners. But that appreciation will not prevent them from protecting their own interests in any way, shape, or form. And that obviously has large impacts on the forestry and lumber industry. So that's all not great. The last thing I'll say is everything else that's happening, the budget process, this industry has been a focus for this administration, supporting it in their mind through tariffs and through some of these executive orders. The budget will increase, the Senate version of the budget bill that's going through right now will sell off a large portion of public lands in the West in an effort to support both forestry and the fossil fuel industry. And I guess my big takeaway from all of those things, and I just said this to Alan, is that none of what Alan is talking about is considered in that. All of those policy, from our perspective, all of those policy decisions are pretty sort of backward looking. They're softwood lumber focused. They're not imagining a market that looks like what Alan is talking about, and they certainly aren't imagining a market that applies to Vermont. They're imagining a market that applies to large tracts of western forests that sort of supports a status quo like timber industry that has seen a lot of consolidation, and so none of those things are good for Vermont, in our opinion.
Thank you for that sobering assessment. And I think it also speaks to the fact that, once again, we're kind of on our own as a region, that we have a huge opportunity in our natural resource base that we have to think very innovatively about. What can we do for ourselves, right? There's a regional security and not just national security element, right? So Chris, take us over to the larger view of the whole region, given that you're with Vermont Maine Woods. What are you hearing on the ground from all of the folks that you normally talk to throughout the industry about how they're navigating and managing these uncertainties caused by the tariffs? And maybe touch a little bit about with the tariffs in China and the elimination of the opportunity to sell whole logs to China. Like, what is that dynamic? How is that shaking out in terms of what people are doing on the ground?
Sure. Well, if I can sum up the last several months for us in the hardwood lumber business, I'd like to use Alan's German expression, we are lost. We were coming off three of the worst years in the hardwood business that we've had in some time, and then these tariffs that were implemented a couple months ago was basically a kick in the crotch. So we struggled to understand, initially things like who was going to collect the tariffs, where were the tariffs to be paid, and things like that. And then, of course, the whole situation with the change almost daily pretty much paralyzed us. So I particularly had 25 trucks scheduled to go to Canada and China. Within a week, they were all canceled. In fact, I had one truck that had the lumber on it, ready to head out the door, and the customer called up in Canada and said, take the lumber off. So it's been a frustrating time with the back and forth. And what it's done pretty much is just paralyzed us. We don't know. There's no optimism. There's no speculation. So everybody's just kind of pulled back and waiting and hoping that the dust will finally settle. The log situation to China, even though there was a ban, there are still ways for those logs that are getting into China. And a lot of it was either Canadian companies buying the logs themselves, bringing them up, and then, of course, stuffing those logs into containers in Quebec and New Brunswick, and then sending them over to China. So it didn't completely stop. And then also, Vietnam became a huge market for logs as a result. So there's been a lot of logs and lumber going into Vietnam, which has made its way into China. But also, Vietnam's becoming a bigger player now in the hardwood lumber business, and I hope that that will become the central export area for us in the future.
Thanks. So one of the other things that has been noticed with the tariffs is the impact on the industry related to diesel and steel. And I'm wondering, Oliver, is that something you can address, or?
I'll just be very brief. There's steel tariffs at 50% on imports from most countries. We get most of our steel made domestically, but I think we get around 25% of steel from Brazil, Mexico, and Canada. So those tariffs are now 50%. That, of course, is going to increase steel costs, increase construction and housing costs, compound that with the increased costs and uncertainty of the wood supply, and you have significant increases in housing costs with higher steel and higher wood and from traditional housing that uses those materials. Diesel, there's a 10% tariff on diesel imports from Canada, but diesel prices have remained relatively stable over the past few months. We'll see what new conflict in the Mideast does to that, if anything. Diesel remains widely available, about $3.50 a gallon. So I think we're seeing more impacts to the steel side with just No real shortages in availability that I could find from my research yet, but much higher costs for steel and diesel, more or less status quo, absorbing that 10% increase tariff.
So adding some additional complexity and still a bit of like wait and see what's going to happen, right? So Tim, you do a lot of work back and forth over the border. You've been up to Canada a bunch, meeting with folks. Give us a sense from your vantage point and the conversations that have been happening. How significant is what's going on that you're hearing on the ground here in Vermont related to the industry and the connection to the Canadian industry and yeah, just anything related to that relationship?
Yeah, so I mean, I have been going up there, and I was up there with Senator Welch. I mean, you were going up there, hugging is a great thing coming from Vermont. Let's, we're still Vermont, we still love you. We want to be your 11th province. I mean, we hear this. Let's, how can we keep this relationship going? Obviously, there's not only what's going on with the tariffs. There's also the rhetoric, which has really affected all of Canada, and I think that's where initially, and we're still hearing the pushback from the insult, basically, that they feel, and it's kind of galvanized them, and they're also looking at it like they're a little more sincere about diversifying their market because of that, and I think it's because of that was insults that they perceived that they were the good neighbor, and now we've thrown eggs at them. That they're looking at, the more EU, they're trying to be more flexible and nimble, but at the end of the day, you still hear that we still are their market. Like we really, truly are, and for a lot of these people, I mean, their whole population is on our border, that they need us, and they don't like that fact. But obviously, this has been very difficult. It's been very hard for them to comprehend, like, why this is happening. But they're looking at it. They're being, I think, more strategic than, say, we are when it comes to all these and figuring out problems or figuring out solutions. They're targeting red states, right? They need to change those politicos' minds to go then convince the administration of why this is not a good thing within this ecosystem. But I would say that the only good thing that's come out of all of this is to realize that Vermont and Canada, and specifically Quebec, is how closely integrated we have been and we are, and it's such a really intense ecosystem, and our integration is so deep that this is a slow truck to turn a lot of these times, especially with the supply chain factor. And then obviously, the key words now are, pause. Like we pause business between us. Obviously, uncertainty because of that is the big reason. And they're also fearful, especially in this industry, is that in the forest products industry, there's a lot of jobs at stake on the Canada side, and how they're going to solve that problem. And then on the other side is some people look at the advantages. There's some companies will probably move here or expand here, expand into the U.S. And Vermont is a great place for Quebecers to come over because of relationships, the proximity. And so some people are looking at that as a bonus, but it still takes, no one expands in a day. I mean, it takes years to actually kind of relocate or expand into the U.S. market and do that. But, that people have been talking about that. We've seen more interest on that level. We're also seeing it from the EU, which is a whole other market we haven't even talked about, and what's going to happen there. So, but hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, no, that is great, and it helps to then pivot a little bit too into, I want to ask Rob and Sarah to jump in here around, so given these challenges, given these uncertainties, what are you hearing on the ground, both from the Northern Forest Center and from Northern Border Regional Commission, thinking about where are those opportunities? And Tim mentioned, the potential prospect of some additional capacity being built on this side of the border, which I would assume is not just Vermont, but would be in New Hampshire and Maine as well. So what are some of the things that you're hearing or some solutions that you're thinking about that are possibilities? Maybe they haven't come to pass yet, but they're things you've been noodling on as what do we do with this at this time in this situation?
Sarah?
Rob's going first.
I'm going first. Morning, I'm Rob Bradley with the Northern Forest Center. I have so many thoughts here that no one really wants to hear them because they tend to be a little bit on the gloomier side of where we are, and you all know that, living that day to day. I think I would say that just from a big picture perspective, a lot of the press right now, for maybe good reason, is covering the tourism side and the lack of Canadians coming down. But I think there's lack of exposure to this issue we're talking about today, which I think, to Steve's point earlier, puts us in like the stepchild role, which I think is kind of unfortunate. So there's an opportunity, I think, there about how this embedded industry is as important as a tourism industry, but that's the seasonal headline right now. Again, these, in a state like Vermont, across Northern Forest, these go together, right? I don't mean to tease them apart, but we need to talk about them more coherently and how the working landscape supports people who come here to visit in them, their view sheds, their experiences. So that's sort of one point. I think the second point is that we have to understand from northern Maine woods to North Country of Vermont to Green Mountain State to the Adirondacks, we have very different personalities, both in legislatures, in state personas, and in regulatory structures. And so we see different scale opportunities in each place that I think may or may not help this broader market because the trees don't know the boundaries, businesses don't know the boundaries. But I guess I would say that the opportunity here lies in a lot of what Alan laid out before, is that we have a housing crisis. Well, let's make sure we solve it with, from a homegrown solution and not repeat the issues of the past. We have as we all have known, we've talked about this for generations now, we have a fossil fuel problem. We are disproportionately using number 2 heating oil. A lot of the public policies of the last administration really support electrification, which had some challenges. We have forgotten, not we, some people have forgotten that modern wood heat, automated wood heat, is a great part of the whole system. So there's an opportunity there. In Maine, there's really a new plant to be on the Maine mills, or the Millinocket mill site, Ensign, looking at green biofuels. That's a Canadian company. There are, as we know, there's a Canadian footprint here, whether it be Irving in Maine, whether it be Tupper, what used to be Hardwoods, Tupper Mill, Canadian oil mill. So we already have some of these relationships underway. But I want to, sorry for this rambling thought here. I want to go back to, we tend to think about, I use the term we maybe too largely. We, society, thinks about the solution from a supply side. We need to think about it from a demand side. And actually what we need to make sure we really make sure that people really embody is that they care about the product. All of you who go in and you go to a flooring store and you look at something that looks like wood, it definitely isn't wood, right? Isn't that wrong? And the price point is just marginally lower than the real thing. Well, it's obviously not as healthy. It's not as, from the supply chain and manufacturing process, it's not as healthy from a living perspective. Maybe someone would say it's more durable, but I think we have a market problem that really is, again, I think an opportunity. And I think the last thing I would say is that we have a price subjectivity problem, and we say, well, this is more expensive than that. Well, we have costed into fossil fuels all the externalities, we haven't costed into, but we are continuing to cost into those externalities, those on the wood side, that creates this imbalanced playing field. So I think really this is the challenging thing, because if you think about how long it takes for someone to actually know a new product and bring a new product to market, like Timber HP, their great wood-based insulation from Maine, that's an uphill battle. So I think we need to be thinking differently in the industry about how we are thinking right and left, not politically, but right and left, about what's on our periphery and the whole building supply chain, such that we are evangelizing, if you will, in a positive way, all the opportunities that we can get out there, really from a demand. Again, we have pushed all the supply side, but it's about demand that is going to allow more timber harvested to actually go into places. So I'll pause there.
You going to pick up from there?
I'll be crisp and succinct. Is that what you wanted us to be? So Northern Borders Regional Commission is a federal and state partnership with the states of Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, and New York, and we invest federal funds through our partnership with the governors and the leadership of each state in economic and community development projects primarily. So we have the history in the commission of being developed in part because of the stagnation and the loss of our paper mill industry and our forest economy and our entire supply chain of our wood products. We are similar to the Appalachian Regional Commission when they really lost their coal industry. And I would say similar to the Appalachian Regional Commission and the stigma around coal, right? There is a really fascinating rebranding and redevelopment of what an industry can do that we have to work on socially. And I think you brought that up with your question earlier, right? About environmental stewardship and environmental concepts. So one opportunity that I would share, and I don't think it's easy to fix in any way, but I'm thinking about one of the first books I ever got my son, and it was Knuckle Boom Loaders Load Logs. Right? Like, I think we need to start to change how we talk about our forests from day one, from when they're little, because it needs to be a part of the narrative of what environmental stewardship is. So that's one, and it might simply be like, let's get all the folks from the Conservation Law Fund on a bus and take them to see some of these new businesses, right? Let's get them into the woods with the harvesters. There are some relational things that I think we could do really well. There are some marketing things that I think need to be done. That's one opportunity that I see. The other, and Rob spoke to it really well, the difference in state government coordination across our 4 states is really significant. The fact that Oliver and Tim are sitting next to each other and know about the economic development impacts of what's happening in the forest industry is not necessarily true in all 4 of the states that we work with. I would say Maine, in many ways, is really far ahead. As Vermont is with our local food movement, Maine has really leaned in to their forest roadmap and made that a cornerstone of their equivalent of the Agency of Commerce and Community Development. So they are directing their investments into the forest economy in a way that we have started to do, but we need to do more of, right, Oliver? And I then also think that there is a coordination around what that means in terms of the brand of economic development that each state is really choosing to lean in on. New Hampshire does it around outdoor recreation really well, but again, not around the forest economy as such. So coordination in state governance helps to lead to that regional, bioregional governance that Alan was talking about this morning, and entities like ours can help to then leverage the investment behind that regional thinking. So one is a marketing problem and the other is a governance problem. Opportunity. Opportunity.
Can I jump in on the opportunity bit in an effort to not sound like the Grim Reaper all the time? I do think there is the fact that we're all in this room, honestly, and Ellen, like the work that you all do, thinking about both on the food side, on the forest side, what the opportunities are for Vermont in the region is an incredibly important opportunity. The fact that we have you here is a real asset. And what the uncertainty, I think, will force us to do is get our own house in order and think about how we can survive more locally, and what the market dynamics are going to be in the places we can see around us, and not just in China and Europe and Canada. And I think that is an opportunity to sort of strengthen foundations for us here in Vermont in ways that are exciting, in ways that Alan was talking about, that are like really inspiring and sort of systemically beneficial. And then the second opportunity, I think, in this particular industry, and some of the work Alan was talking about, is a resource we don't really talk about enough in government in particular is time. It isn't such a valuable resource, like, to humans, just period. Like, it's like the resource I cherish the most for myself and like my family. And like thinking about some of these building practices, thinking about the sort of supply of the materials, tightening the circle like expands a ton of opportunity in time. Like if we like just our office is in downtown Burlington on Main Street across from a construction project that we were told is going to take 5 weeks, and it's been 7 months, and it's going to take another year, and it's like that is the story of both housing construction, just building in general. We understand, I think culturally, is like, oh, it's going to take forever, it's going to be cost overruns, time overruns. And the ability to be predictable and fast in doing some of these things, I think is like a real opportunity for this industry to make a dent and to like sell itself in the solutions of the future.
So I want to bump it over to Jacob to pick up on that, but I also just want to say that if there is a question that you are burning to ask, you're welcome to come up to the empty chair, and I'll recognize you to do that. So while everybody's thinking about that, Jacob, talk to us a little bit about what Ryan was just saying, and what Sarah was talking about of going local and really thinking more about how do we do this as a bioregion, and then Rob's comment about thinking about the demand side more. You're really focused on building that demand side. So what are you seeing on the landscape? What do you think is the real opportunities that we should be shifting more of our attention towards from your viewpoint?
So I'm in the building industry, so representing that part of the demand. I see it in a number of different ways. Maybe I'll use our company's work as a little bit of just like a case study to extrapolate for the regional industry. So we've pivoted from being custom design builds or service providers into now prefabricating high performance building products using local ag residues and forest products. And the shift for us into prefabrication and providing a manufactured solution has enabled us to be able to get more of these local bio-based products into more buildings and deliver them at a lower cost. And yes, we're kind of small and a bit niche, but we're certainly not the only ones making those transitions, and that's been a replicable model that we've seen being able to scale down to a much smaller scale than like 20th century models of manufacturing, which require these huge CapEx investments like Alan was talking about previously. So we've been able to make that transition in real time. And that's like dramatic. It's been I think 375% increase in the number of homes we've been able to provide from going from custom construction into prefabricated solutions. So I think that trajectory, there's a huge interest and movement towards prefabricated solutions that have gone from like larger commercial projects that are now really scaling down to like smaller low-rise residential construction. There's a tremendous amount of interest in that. So just that trajectory of a technology shift in the market of thinking of buildings, not every single building being a custom built unicorn for an individual, but actually a little more like cars. Like we need to have, like maybe you don't get to decide the number of doors in your car. Maybe you just if you're okay with 3 bedrooms and a bathroom, then this is okay. I think the market is really shifting towards that because of the benefits of prefabrication. I'd say the other trend that sort of coordinates well with that is a really strong interest within the sustainability community in the building industry around local products, and I'd say bioregionalism is a huge theme in this space. So like that as a concept is garnering a tremendous amount of attention from people in the green building community. It hits upon a bunch of benefits from like local transport, local economic investment. Relationship to place is becoming an increasingly strong like value and concept and story. So the storytelling around the relationship of people and buildings and place and that's been enormous. I think the pandemic was huge in changing that, where all of a sudden people understood that we don't just have products. Products come from materials that come through supply chains, and people are all of a sudden, I've never heard architects talk about supply chains more in my entire career than the last few years. And so there's an understanding and a concept of relationship to where these things come from. I think that while that is still a niche market, it's a niche market that matches quite well with the capacity of our industry in our region. We've got, 100 million people living within a day's drive of here, these major urban centers, and they are all looking for, where did that wood come from? And what's the story of that product? And like, that has very valuable market cachet, and there's a host of different sustainability labeling programs which really like quantify and make that visible. that I think Vermont has a huge opportunity to, and I've actually already seen some of the sort of value-added product manufacturers in the state be able to capitalize on that and sending products down to Massachusetts that then or Boston, and then get to tell the story of that and get to have the sustainability credits that come along with that. Yeah, that's my hot take.
So picking up on that then, that we've got, any number of you could speak to this. Sounds like there's, on the governance front, there's probably some legislation that would be helpful to enable more of what you were just talking about, sort of really promoting, supporting, and the CapEx that's needed on the capital side. Some of you guys are connected to capital provider communities like Sarah, like Ryan. But Oliver and Tim, you guys are in the legislature and hearing what is being talked about or not being talked about. Chris, I'm not sure how much you're part of the legislative conversations in the other, knowing about some of the things in the other states as well, but just noodle a little bit here briefly on, are there some low-hanging fruit that we should be catching up on or taking advantage of? And I think that'll bleed into really nicely in the table conversations when we start talking about other action items. But is there something that's top of mind for you all from a capital perspective, from a legislative perspective, that we should at least have on our radar as a way of really promoting what you all have been talking about, the shift towards?
I can jump in first. For me, there are two things that really matter about ensuring that we have the right flows of capital coming back into this industry and into this sector and into the sort of vision, right, for the future. One is the voices that we have in this room and the voices that we have in this state and in New Hampshire and in Maine and in upstate New York. The more that we can talk to our elected officials right now, and I don't just mean Senator Welch, right, because our congressional delegation here gets it and is very proactive. But I do think that there is more power than I think we know in the associations that show up and do a fly-in to Washington, D.C. and get time with congressional delegations, and I'll get to our legislature in just a moment. But I wish that there was a set of 7 talking points that everybody who is in the forest economy industry could say and could write a postcard, and you don't just have to write them to your own congressionals, you write them to everybody. Because if the message is the same about the investment that is needed, the message will get through. So I think a consistent message at the national level is really important. And it continues to then support the funding through federal agencies, through the Wood Innovations U.S. Forest Service grants, and so on. And it trickles down into the pass-through to your state government, right? So then the second part, I do think, at the state level, we have seen appropriations for specific industries like farm to plate and our local food movement that need to be replicated for other industries that are in the same place of both stigmatized and actual economic stagnation. And I think that is really important to create that vision for what it would look like and then show up in the legislature and talk about it. I forget what the second one was, so we'll pivot.
Oliver, you gonna jump in?
Yeah, I'd build on that a bit. I think at the state level, this administration is focused on housing and affordability. That's the lens that we've looked at, support to the forest products industry and the forest sector through. I'll just make one point. I think we've been successful in the last year in increasing the amount of support available to the industry with a focus on those folks working in the woods. They had a pretty rough go of it in 23 and 24 with climate, wet summers, warm winters. So now there's funding available to help loggers comply with the acceptable management practices. Sarah talked about what VITA is doing to make low interest rate financing available for the forest products industry, although the logging community hasn't taken advantage of that. She mentioned this work we're doing with the Clean Water Fund to get that going. So that's a great first step. I think where we need to be looking at now is what's happening on the processing side with sawmills closing in Vermont and in the region. How can we support innovation and continuation there? And then as others have said, we have a lot of work to do still on the social license piece. We spent time responding to public records requests in litigation around some of the best stewardship and forest management on state-owned lands, I would argue anywhere in the Northeast. And yet we spend time defending that work instead of thinking creatively about how to do it better and what new things to start doing. So, I really echo what was said about talking to your legislators. I would credit our commissioner, Danny Fitzko, for being really active in getting legislators out to the woods and seeing our work on state lands, on private lands, in collaboration with landowners and county foresters to understand the value chain and the benefits to forest of good stewardship and how that fits into supplying wood. But there's a huge remaining amount of work to do to get forestry on par with, say, how the agriculture sector is appreciated and seen in Vermont.
All right, Rob.
Yeah, I think quickly. I mean, I think when I talked about housing, I want to just mention that there are very, very, very few financing options if you're going to actually construct mid-income housing. So we actually had to raise our own fund, impact investment fund, to fund that. You mentioned historic LIHTC before. That's a great tool, and yet we need all kinds of housing. So I think that when we look at the encumbrances of a policy, we've accepted to serve a certain portion of housing, but we haven't looked at it from an economic development perspective and actually have the supports to decrease or offset some of the construction, acquisition, labor costs to allow for that housing to be put in place. And so I think there's private solutions, but they're very small in terms of trying to come against this insurmountable risk. And I think that is a public issue at both the state and the federal level, that we've acceptable places in which we invest in housing, and unacceptable because we assume people are going to profit from them. Low-income housing developers for profit are making out just fine.
Thanks. So we've got Alex Barrett is jumped into the hot seat here with us. We're getting close to time, so but ask your question.
All right, I'll try to be quick then. Innovation is great, but we have a lot of, I think, underutilized things that we could be doing better to begin with. And one of those in Vermont that I'd like to hear your all's opinion on is the current use program, which is well designed, touches a ton of people, has a massive amount of wood, and is incredibly underutilized from a doing good forestry standpoint. So how does that program fit into the local wood supply world, innovation, how we could build a better wood economy in Vermont, from managing forests through logging up to sawmilling and all that?
Great question. Who wants to take that? Jacob, you want to take it?
I can take just a really quick, this is not a complete answer, but just a little piece from the demand side. One of the bottlenecks around being able to have smaller landholders and smaller markets be able to provide verified sustainable wood products to the industry is that the industry needs certifications and needs some documentation to back that up. It's not relational. When we buy our wood, we know the forester and we know the mill. When an architect is specifying that in Boston, it's transactional, not relational, which isn't bad, but it means that it's very difficult to scale down these transparency documentation programs to individual landowners managing their own properties. I see the current use program as a fantastic basis or foundation upon which new certification programs can bundle or can coordinate across a series of formally managed small holding lots that could take advantage of the premium markets that are associated with sustainable forest products. That's a little piece on the demand side I'd love to hear from.
I would just say quickly that, not to toot Peter's horn too much, but in recognition of the Vermont's unique, or we're different, that much of our land mass our forest is privately held, and so we worked with the Vermont Woodlands Association a few years back to provide some federal funding to do education and outreach to private landowners to make sure they have some understanding of the tools available to them and what the opportunities might be in their forest that's in current use as we speak. And so that work is ongoing, and hope to see that education piece is super important as, land turns over and places turn over.
Great. All right, Jed, we're going to do your last question, then we're going to kick it back to Alan to wrap it up. So what's your question? No, sorry. We want to have time for table talk, so there'll be time for talk.
Okay, Alan, thank you. A broad question. You've been hitting on the legislative engagement piece. For the record, Jed Lipsky, Representative Lamoille 1. Agriculture, Food Resiliency, and Forestry Committee, but I'm here as a logger of 58 years. Anyway, one thing that has changed for everyone in this room, that the attitude in the legislature has been much more inclusive and open and creative with regard to supporting both agriculture and particularly the forest economy and all the complex values that we depend on. So my question really, in a way, goes to Paul. One battle that we all, the Vermont Forest Products Association, the professional logging contractors of the Northeast, and every other interest group banded together and got very strong support in the House and the Senate to support the Rygate electrical generating wood-fired plant over on the Connecticut River, as well as the McNeil plant. And one thing we're looking for is creating efficiencies from the excess heat and waste energy that comes from wood generation. Yes, we all agree it's sort of a carbon neutral form of energy, but it also helps sustain the timber harvesters and the landowners that are managing their land for a more biodiversity and more climate resiliency to utilize that incredible low-grade material in a positive way. So my question to you, what specifically might you recommend as the highest and best use for this excess energy, which we have statutorily required these plants to increase their efficiency by 50%? Thank you.
Is that a question for Alan?
That's it.
Or for anybody?
Look,
Anybody?
Ryan, every one of you, Sarah, I could ask 100 questions
Anybody?
too, but that's...
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, Tim.
So, I actually met with the new owner of the Rygate plant yesterday.
Excellent.
It's an investment group out of Connecticut that basically received it for $1. I think they had a lot of money in it originally. But, they're looking for answers. I was just talking to Ellen and Rob about...
I'm asking up to you.
And so, I think they're the right group that want to invest in ways to solve this problem and actually come up with other ways as well. So I think having that interest that they have will actually come up with a good solution. To me, that's the big thing, is that these actually owners are looking for ways to catalyze this. And I think we have some experts here that could help with it once that, look at what's really happening there and how they can solve that problem. But I think it's the right people now own it, is my answer. So, but maybe someone else has a better answer than I.
Chris, anything you want to add to that? Good. Oliver, go ahead.
Just very briefly, I think I would encourage them to look at pellet manufacturing. The reason pellets are an important part of advanced wood heat, our Climate Council has a perception that a lot of pellets come from out of state, and therefore it's less of a sort of Vermont-friendly future solution. I know it's a part of advanced wood heat, but the perception if the revenues and therefore the money is coming from out of state, that's not as a technology and approach that should be as favored in the climate action plan moving forward as some others. So we're thinking about that and saying, how do we cord wood, dry chips, wet chips, and pellets, how do we get more of that made in Vermont to meet local advanced wood heating needs? And we've suggested that the Mizzen Capital folks consider that among other options.
Yeah, chips seems to be there. Yeah, that's right.
Exactly.
Awesome. Go ahead,
And I just want to commend the state to work in coordination around this, because you look at New Hampshire and Maine, the plants have shut down. Those are just pure market indicators. You just can't produce electricity at the right cost compared to the market. So it does need this secondary outlook. It does need support from the legislature. So, hats off to making that existing infrastructure work. Because once it's shut down, it's certainly much harder to start it up again.
Am I allowed to ask a question just for the whole room? I'm hearing from Jacob and Alan about sustainability importance and things like that. As somebody we have 3 third-party certification programs at our mill. I can count on one finger the amount of requests that I get in a particular year about certified wood. So I'm wondering where that breakdown is. And it's anybody here in the room that can answer that. I'd love to have that conversation.
And no one's willing to pay more for it, right? They're not willing to pay any more for it.
Oh, absolutely not. And that we've given up on that.
I want to keep it to this group because we're going to be shifting to table talk, so I'm a little nervous about opening.
Talking about later.
But is there anybody that wants to just touch on that really briefly, Jacob or Alan in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start. I'll say that I think, most people, consumers don't know the difference between SPF, organic, fair trade, FSC. It's all just a bunch of alphabet soup to them, and it doesn't mean anything. And, on the supplier side, doing FSC, everyone would love to do it. It's incredibly expensive, just like doing LEED certification for buildings. I kind of feel like if we had a transparent nutritional information label on every product that told you how much carbon was emitted, it was really like an environmental product declaration that was legible. More people would understand what the benefits are. But that doesn't, we can't just rely on consumers. I think this question about policies, regulations, sticks, carrots, all of these things have to sort of be coordinated. I know that in France, Nicolas Sarkozy proposed a 10% tax incentive to use French timber because the forests were really collapsing. And then Macron government came in and said 51% of all buildings would have to include bio-based materials coming out of French forests. And the French are the most advanced timber builders now in a matter of 2 decades. So I feel like if we could coordinate a legible nutritional information, sustainable nutritional information label that people could understand, that we could provide the support to small manufacturers to help them do all the paperwork that they need to do, and to subsidize, say, an FSC certification for them. If we could create tax incentives to developers to use those products, and frankly, if we could turn carbon into the currency rather than renminbi, euros, dollars, we would start to see the impacts of the decisions that we're making. And I don't think we have any legibility in that at all. And we certainly don't have coordination in terms of policy or certification systems. So I think we could model that, frankly, in New England. I think we could, and we could make a New England-grown buildings.
All right, Jacob.
Very quick.
Yep.
So just to complement that with a more of a direct answer on market coordination, I go to a lot of building industry conferences and look at the trade shows. There's a huge demand from the architectural community looking for those hero products, and the folks that I see in those rooms from the industry are European manufacturers and massive multinational corporations that have their little niche brand. I do not see regional manufacturers or representatives of regional markets connecting with the niche markets in the architectural community. I think the market is there, I think the supply is there, and I don't know why there isn't a connection there, but I'm not seeing companies such as yourself in those architectural trade floors, which is where architects are doing their specifications.
All right. Alan, I'm going to give you, thank you for that. Very, very good. Hopefully that's going to move into our table conversations. But Alan, I'm going to give you a 1-minute opportunity to sort of bring us home here with this conversation. Paint the picture. What could it look like 10 years from now if we had some regional governance, we had some regional infrastructure, we had some regional financing, we had demand that was starting to really want what we have to offer, knowing what's possible on the architectural front? What does it, paint the picture. What does it look like? What should we be envisioning? And I'm trying to imagine 10 years from now, we're back here in this room. What have we built?
Okay, I'm going to tell a 40-year story in 1 minute. Austria, Handwerk tradition, great woodworkers, good forests, very high labor costs. High labor costs drove innovation. They started developing incredible products because, and prefabrication techniques because their labor costs were high and they needed to optimize the manufacturing process and bring them into factories rather than out in the field. They started developing these products like what we know as CLT today and glulam techniques and prefabrication methods and all the tooling that goes along with it. 2009, a British guy wanted to build a 9-story building out of CLT because he saw it building single-family houses in Austria. No one believed him. He built it. Now England is producing some of the most CLT and mass timber buildings in the world. A guy in Washington State and Vancouver and British Columbia saw that, wrote a whole paper on that for the U.S. Forest Service. Now we have a lot of CLT buildings going up. And a lot of the CLT is being misused by architects because they don't understand the actual properties of it. So here we are today, and everyone in New England is going like, it's a wood revolution. Look at all the wood we have. And then it's like a freight train going by and we didn't get on it. We missed it. Why? Because we don't have the species that make those particular materials. We need to develop a manufacturing program supported by legislation, supported by regulation, that has specific products that are particular to this forest that we grow. And we can't just look out of the boat and try to do Austria or to do the Pacific Northwest. We have to understand the properties of the materials, the incredible workforces that we have, which are in danger of becoming moribund. And we have to make the connections that Jacob just described between the amazing things that come out of our forests and the amazing workforces we have, pay them properly, and get on the map, because we can do that.
Great, thank you. Really inspiring. So can we give a big round of applause for everybody in our fishbowl? Advance for me. So we are going to shift. We're going to take 20 minutes at your tables. And here's what we're going to do. You have on your tables some note cards and some pens. So thinking about all of what you heard, go ahead and go down a couple more. Here are your questions. Take a little time, think about what you've heard from our amazing fishbowl members, our little fishies up here, and think about the fact that we have identified in Vermont that we need to build between 24 and 36,000 additional year-round homes between 2025 and 2029. That is a huge number. We're not anywhere on pace for that. We've heard from Alan and others that wood can be a major part of this. So what would it take to ensure that wood produced in Vermont, in our region, plays a significant role in building this housing? What incentives would need to be in place, and what barriers would need to be removed? So take the next 20 minutes, have a conversation at your table. If you have good ideas, write them down on the card. We're going to collect them and put them as part of the convenings after the fact. And then we're going to hear from a few tables before we release for lunch, okay? So if you're a couple of people at a table, please just, get together and come up with some good ideas, all right? Thank you. I'm looking for 3 great ideas to share. So I'm looking for 3 different tables to have one very briefly stated good idea that you think we should move forward on in the state and the region. So who's got a really good idea that was just like burning at your table, like, wow, that's a really good idea? Who's got it? There's a back there. Who's got it? I think you got some ideas. I want to hear them. Who's got an idea? Go right there. Stand up, introduce yourself.
I am Chris Kerrigan with the University of Vermont Professional and Continuing Education. And especially as we look at school district consolidation and for housing, we have an opportunity to recondition old schools, especially with mass timber.
Yes.
Yeah, and then in terms of supportive ideas, mass timber tax exemptions, and then also timber transit grants to bring new species to market and create market demand, especially with municipalities.
Fantastic. Jed, you got that down in the legislative work that we need to do, and the trade associations, we got to come together around some of these ideas. We're going to put it in the convenings here so we don't lose any of it. I need another idea. Who had a really good idea that can match what Chris and his table came up with? Come on. Who's got a good idea?
Don't be shy. Steve, do you have one?
Maybe I should take the glasses off? No, I think it's better. Remove restrictions on lumber from Vermont forests to be able to be used in rough lumber. The problem in Vermont is building codes, and native wood cannot get stamped. Hemlock cannot get stamped. White pine can be, spruce can, but we also don't use, we have a lot of hardwood, and that's not helpful for building houses unless you're putting in floors.
So say it again. Then what's the shift we need?
Got to work with the building codes in the state of Vermont.
Okay.
For one.
Great.
Major one.
All right, Jed, you got that one down too, right? All right. What? Last one. Who's got it? Yeah.
I'm Rick Kelly, and I have a forest management company. So this goes back to the question of housing and how do we get that done. We think one of the first things that can be done is to talk to the customer as to what they want, what's going to influence them, rather than trying to dictate what they can do. Much like what the food industry has done at stores. You go in, you buy your food, you can see the calories on there, whether it's farm fresh, whether it's organic, or what have you. And in certification of lumber, one gentleman was talking about that earlier, we could do the same thing. We could talk about what is the carbon impact by using this lumber, what is sustainable forest really looks like in terms of recreation, wildlife management, what have you, a number of things. And finally, the real key is in housing, we need some demonstrations. The work that we heard about this morning through a very interesting talk was some of the New Haven project, for example. Is spectacular. And we need to do that in Vermont if we're going to solve the housing problem. The big issue here is that it's $506,000 per unit to build a house, according to the state of Vermont. And because of regulations, policies, whatever. But the key is that if we came out and built, say, a wood program, a wood house, all carbon pro, and develop that, say 5 to 10 units in one area, and use that as a demonstration. That could then be something that the legislature can look at, other architects can look at, builders could look at, and give them a starting point. It's much like the corn trials that were done in the 1940s when no one was growing corn. It was all 3 or 4 feet high, and somebody started a demonstration of hybrid corn, and that corn was 8 feet high. And then all the other farmers started to say, "Oh, I'm going to build that or plant that corn instead." And it worked very well. And something like a housing demonstration might do that.
All right, thank you so much. Those are really great ideas. I'm really looking forward to reading through all. Jed, did you have one more? All right, we'll entertain one more.
Okay, thank you. We were talking about barriers to some of this housing building, and with all due respect to Alan, a lot of Vermonters like their rural life, would like to stay in their villages and rural communities. So one barrier has to do with this, what's called the Tier 3 category, which may actually cover about 90% of Vermont when it comes to exemptions. Tier 1, where you have municipal water and sewer, and Tier 2. But Tier 3 is most all of Vermont, and that's rural Vermont, where Act 250 would not be exempt and would face a lot of barriers for modest development or construction or reconverting old settlement villages into good housing. So some reform, I would urge everyone in this room to consider trying to influence the Land Use Review Board. It's now in the process of rulemaking to, instead of enhance the requirements to go through Act 250, to be exempted, particularly when you're utilizing local forests for local construction.
Great, thanks, Jed. Okay, so here's for those that are interested, one of the challenges that I think Jed would agree is that good ideas that come to the legislature get thought about usually in December or maybe January or February. And it's kind of too late for that session. And so I would encourage you all to think about, of all the ideas you heard about today, you got a room full of people that are interested. Find some other folks. Think about your associations, your businesses, your organizations, anybody that you think could come together to start thinking now about next legislative session. What are the 2 or 3 things the industry could actually come together on and move together on? Right? That was one of the things that came out of our conversation in the fishbowl. Let's start today with this summit, all the people in this room, be thinking about who needs to come together to advance a common agenda. So I'll leave you with that. I want to thank you so much for your participation this morning, for all of our fishbowlers, for your good questions. And we're going to take your cards back so that we can write them all up. And Christine, tell us about lunch.
Yes. So thanks, Ellen, and thank you for everybody who participated in the plenary, and thank all of you for your good ideas. So we do want to capture those. So if you have cards that you want to share, just give them to myself, or actually Esther has a box right there. You just put it there. So as you go to lunch is ready. So it's just the buffet style. So we have a bit of an extended lunch today. And so at 1:45 is when I'm going to ask folks to come together, because then we will shift over to Timberline for the afternoon sessions. So what I would encourage you to do is have lunch, visit with the exhibitors, do some mingling. And I do know that there are a couple of tables that we have put some reserve signs on, because there's a few conversations that want to be had. So there's one for VTSU and one for Vermont Woodlands Association. So if you want to be part of those, feel free to stay there. But if not, please make room for the folks who are going to have those conversations. So with that, I'm going to let you all go and have a wonderful taco bar.